Hello everyone, welcome to this hangout about Rio 2016 Olympics Rule 40, a help or hindrance for athletes. Today there are only three of us in this hangout because we had some technical problems to getting Clifford on board of this hangout, so apologies for that. But we decided to go along and to talk about this very, very interesting topic. So there are three of us. I'm Marcos Castro. I'm the football director at Prozis, the biggest online sports nutrition store. But with me, I also have Alex and Daniel. I would like for you to introduce yourselves, please. Alex, maybe you first.
Sure. Hi, Marcos. Hi, everyone. So I'm a business executive in sports and recently done a master in sports management. I think the relevance for me to be in that hangout tonight is I did basically a dissertation around the topic of ambush marketing in the context of the Olympics, studying closely the Rule 40 and its implications. So I think it's a good opportunity to discuss this tonight. And in terms of my professional experience, I've been working for the last 10 years around media, sponsorship sales, and at the moment I'm a business executive at Delta Tree, which is a fan engagement company in the technology sector.
All right. So it looks excellent. Daniel, what about you?
Hi Marcos, hi everybody. My name's Daniel Alfreds. I work at Couchmans, the specialist sports law firm. My involvement in things like Rule 40 is that at Couchmans, I and the firm, we represent both athletes and rights holders, as well as sponsors and endorsers. And so we come across issues like this all the time, either on one side trying to protect the rights holders from ambushers, or on the other side advising what can be done and what can't be done and what people can get away with and what they shouldn't even try. So I've been interested in sports law for a long time, but working directly in it for just over 2 years now. So I'm hoping to go into a bit more of the technical legal side and share some of the insight of the issues I've come across.
Yeah, and that is perfect. So to everyone that is watching, please, if you have a question for the panel, please post your questions on the YouTube comments section. So basically, before we start talking about Rule 40, the first thing we need to understand what is Rule 40 and why it was created. So I think that Alex wants to share some insights with us. So Alex, I will put now one of the slides that you want to share with us, and for you to speak a little bit about Rule 40.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. So yeah, let me show me the slides. And so, I mean, basically the Olympics is a mega event, and as you know, top sponsors pay a huge sum of money to secure exclusivity rights. Now, what the IOC has done, you know, in terms of guaranteeing that exclusivity and maximizing the rights is trying to protect any sort of game time advertising activities from the athletes, essentially, but also the whole entourage. So, for example, the coaching staff, the trainers, doctors, just to make sure that basically there is no disruption from those programs during that time. In terms of the blackout period, it's normally starts 9 days before the opening ceremony, and it finishes 3 days after the closing ceremony. So it's almost basically a whole month where the athletes and the whole staff is not allowed to engage with any name, image, performance, any sort of PR in any form, whether that's digital, PR, in-store promotions, etc., in the whole collateral. The aim is obviously to reduce ambush and to maximize the funding for the IOC and the different NOCs, which is about 206 of them. If we look at
yeah, you can go on. You can go on. I will show you the slide in a moment.
Okay, so all that obviously is great in practice and in theory, but in reality, as you're probably aware, and most of the people know, there's been a lot of ambush since I think probably in the Montreal Olympics in the 70s, ambush started. It reached its peak in the 1996 in Atlanta, with Nike, which did the ambush of the ambush. I mean, it was massive at the time. And unfortunately, even though London 2012 was probably one of the most secure, the most rigid organizing committee with three main acts in terms of advertising, in terms of the Olympic symbol act, there's been a lot of ambush. There's been a lot of ambush, as you know, Dr. Beats. You can see the picture here on the bottom left of Johan Blake during the final, running with a tourbillon watch, Nike, Paddy Power. I mean, there's two types of ambush we know by association and intrusion, and there's been a lot of cases. So unfortunately, it's been quite busy in that department in the last games.
Well, that is perfect. So also contextualizing Rule 40, I believe, Daniel, that you also want to add some details about this. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can put on my first slide, if we could start from there, Marcos, I'll just go briefly into what exactly Rule 40 is and why this is so controversial. So what Rule 40 is, it basically prevents, the actual wording is, except as permitted by the IOC Executive Board, no competitor, team official, or other team personnel that participate in the Olympics can use their picture or their performance for advertising during the Olympic Games. And as we touched on briefly before, that basically blocks everything. That means that athletes can only do what they are told by their national associations, their governing bodies, or by the IOC. This led, particularly in 2012, with the advent of social media and the explosion of that by athletes, to quite a lot of protests. It was led mainly by the US Olympic team, and Sonia Richards-Ross didn't come up, helped spear the hashtag We Demand Change. A lot of athletes use the Olympic Games, understandably, as a springboard to showcase themselves and an opportunity to fund their training for 4 years for the next Olympics or for the next Games. And that created quite a huge wave of pressure on the IOC and on a lot of the national governing bodies. So if we fast forward then to July 2015, after a lot of discussions with athletes, their representatives, the governing bodies, all the other peoples, the IOC actually came out with a rather bland statement in their conference that said generic advertising would be allowed during the Olympic Games. That phrase, generic advertising, as is shown on the slide, it was met with a lot of pleasure from people like Sonia Richards-Ross, who was all of a sudden very pleased that she would be able to continue advertising. However, it came with a bit of a catch, the fact that the relaxation would be implemented by each national association almost as they thought they should implement it. So Team GB took its own approach, and if Marcus, if you could put on the third slide.
Yep. It's already on.
Sorry, if you could put up slide number 3.
Yeah, this is it, right? Team Great Britain set its own rules for the relaxation.
Yeah, that's the one. So the Team GB put its own rules to relax the restrictions that were imposed, of which actually the US and the Canadian national teams have done something relatively similar. And there we can see Mo and Jessica posing for their adverts. But the two different things that they came up with were the two options of deemed consent and a Rule 40 waiver. So deemed consent was, as you can see in the Mo Farah advert, which I imagine will still be playing during the blackout period mentioned by Alex, is that if there was an advert that had been in continuous use prior to the deadline of 27th of March, it doesn't generally breach the idea of Rule 40, so it doesn't go against the idea of using the Olympics in the background or getting any goodwill from that, and then doesn't create an association with Team GB or the Games itself, then that consent could be granted by Team GB. The one catch, which I think we'll probably come on to a little bit later, was that the individuals, the athletes and the companies sponsoring them had to notify Team GB by the 27th of January. So quite a long time ago, nearly 7 months before the Games itself. So a long period of time in which they'd need to notify them, and as I'm sure Alex will touch on, there'll be plenty of athletes who didn't have anything set up by that point. The other piece of information, the other exception, was the Rule 40 waiver. So this is an example that we see with Jessica Ennis and the Santander. So an example of an athlete using their famous face. The fact that they're famous for being an athlete is fine, but that's what they're famous for. Again, no association with the Olympic Games, and making sure that they were doing it for the sake of being famous rather than in connection with the Olympics itself. There are also a couple of minor exemptions, such as if an athlete was about to be in a competition, say just after the games or just before, then they'd also be able to advertise those. So a bit of a relaxation by Team GB, but not a huge relaxation. And what's quite interesting to note is that not all the governing bodies, the National Olympic Committees, relax their rules. So, for example, the Japanese team, who are competing obviously this year and will be hosting the games in 4 years' time in Tokyo, didn't relax their rules at all. So while some athletes had the benefit, a benefit at least, even not a brilliant one, by relaxation, some countries' athletes got nothing at all. So I think we'll touch on a little bit later how fair that is as well.
Yeah, and now you have talked about Japan, and maybe that's a cultural aspect of Japan, because maybe in other countries, like or like in this case that we have discussed it, Great Britain, that's something that you can do because that's a cultural aspect of the country. So I would like to ask you: do you think that this new Rule 40 is efficient to combat ambush and protect its official partner rights? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I can start answering this. Obviously, coming back to the work, the academic work I've done, I mean, just looking at practice from a practical point of view, clearly somehow you can say that whatever the rule has been in place for quite a number of games so far, there's been a number of ambush cases anyway. It's been growing clearly with digital. I know the IOC has worked very hard with the different Olympics, the hosting cities, to try to nail down any kind of ambush activity, whether that's on the venue, a lot of enactment rules, try to limit and prevent that as maximum. But the reality is, because of digital nowadays, which is so fast, so powerful, so spread, it becomes more and more difficult anyway. From a natural perspective, it's too quick for anyone to control. That's the reality. So I would say it probably helps a lot to prevent. And you can look at the IOC perspective, is that for them to be able to secure some major funding and to pitch some major brands to come and associate themselves with the games and pour a lot of funding, well, there needs to be at least something in place to secure, to recomfort, let's say, the brand. So I can understand what's in place, but in reality, I think that it's just here to prevent, to look good, but it's not that efficient, I would say. Now, that's the practicality. But you can also try to understand from an operational point of view. The major issue as well is there is a very rigid approval system from the IOC. So you'd have to wait. What is the benefit from being an official sponsor as opposed to being a pseudo sponsor? So a pseudo sponsor could be very creative, create some very efficient marketing. You can look at Dr. Beats, you can look whatever sort of very efficient marketing ambush campaigns have been, and do something which is much more settled, much quicker way than an official sponsor. And that's the reality. And that's due to, one, the very rigid. I think it can take up to 29 days to have approval from the IOC to do anything with the athletes. So by being an official sponsor, that gives you an idea already by what is the context to be a top sponsor. It stops you from being very creative, and obviously by that you create less efficient marketing, and that is the ultimate, I would say, context for pseudo sponsors. So all in all, I think it's not that efficient. It looks good, but in reality, especially due to the digital ecosystem and how fast it grows and the number of channels, I'd be very curious to see what's going to happen during the Rio Olympics.
Yeah, that's for sure. Daniel, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I mean, Alex makes a great point there. There's only the speed of which technology has changed and the speed of which you can ambush something like the Rio Games is amazing. Now, if you think when the rule was set up years and years and years ago, they were contemplating television adverts, radio adverts, newspaper adverts, which take time to produce, to make, to get through the various channels and become printed. Whereas today, they can create a hashtag or a Twitter account or a photo, and it's gone instantly. One interesting way, perhaps, that the IOC and the governing bodies have looked to counteract that is to the way that the contract flows. So we've dealt at Couchmans with a lot of Team GB athletes, and having reviewed quite a few of their Team GB contracts, there's a specific clause within the contract that says you will comply with Rule 40. And that flows through from the IOC, obviously telling Team GB and the other governing bodies to make sure that it's in the contract, into the contract with them. And if they don't comply with that and they breach it, in theory at least, they could be kicked out the games. That could be breach of their contract, and they could be sent home.
Yeah, that's really, really hard. And Alex said something about that kept me thinking, because if you are a pseudo sponsor, maybe you can get cheaper activations and get more ROI, even if you are an official sponsor. And that thing for brands, it's an interesting perspective, because you are spending less money and get more ROI for your business. So for me, I think that the most important thing for the hostess, or in this case for the organizer, the IOC, it will be to try to define a way, or try to plan a way to really own the channel where people are going to communicate. Because if digital now, it's the place to go for people to share what they are seeing on television, to share their thoughts about the performance of their athlete that they have just saw. You have to own those digital channels, and you just own those digital channels if you partner with the companies that work in that digital space. So maybe if you partner with Facebook, maybe if you partner with Twitter and so on, with Google, maybe you can own that space, and maybe you can really develop a business model that is more interesting, not only for you, but for your sponsors, and also you can create more value for the audience that is consuming your event, because you can tailor your content. Because when you think about social networks, what social networks do, their main objective is to get as most people as they can in their database, and then sell that database to brands to communicate with them. So imagine Facebook, you have almost 2 billion users in 1 year, I believe. So there's a lot of consumers that you can reach, and the most important thing is that you have the data of all of them. And that also raises a question sometimes in football, and not only in football, is that imagine Real Madrid has 90 million fans on Facebook, but is it really Real Madrid that has those fans, or it is Facebook that has 90 million people that like Real Madrid? So that's a different perspective, right? And that's something that I think that we have to think about when we think about digital. Guys, if you agree, maybe we can go to question number two. If someone has questions to our guests, please post your questions on the YouTube comments section. So guys, do you think that it is applicable and legitimate to monitor and control all athletes' personal and social media activities during the games? What about recently qualified athletes? Equal rights between all sports and athletes? What do you think about this?
Well, what I would say is, due to the current context, I mean, sports at the moment is experiencing a number of issues. Whether that's from a security point of view, we've seen it recently. That's the world we live in nowadays. Either ethics, doping, match fixing, and as I said earlier, the IOC, the governing bodies, the organizing committees have done everything to literally control as much as possible the different touchpoint channels to restrict ambush at their event. The only bit they can't really control nowadays is really the digital element. It is the hardest. As much as you can control your venue, as much as you can go out there and forbid people to advertise on billboards around your host city. It's too challenging nowadays to be able to monitor all the social media activity. I think the numbers were that back in 2008 you had about 1 million worth of tweets during the opening ceremony. For the same London 2012 Olympic ceremony, you have about 500 million tweets around that one same opening ceremony. So considering the number of millions of users you have nowadays on Twitter, I can just imagine, let you imagine the sort of tweeting activity you can have just on, was it 16th of August, the 5th of August, sorry, next 5th of August. And that is just one channel, Marcus. You can imagine whether that's Snapchat, all those new channels, and also the way it's going, you have all sorts of new technologies, whether that's VR, live streaming, the way we're moving towards social TV. It's just moving so fast, it's so much cluttered, that frankly speaking, there's only one way. You have to actually monitor the social media channels for the sake of the games, for the sake of the ethics, and that's the way to go, really. There's no other way around.
So do you think that instead of trying to beat them, just join them? I'm teasing you. Do you agree with this opinion? So instead of trying to beat them by creating rules like Rule 40, okay, so let's just join them and play by their rules.
Yeah, you're catching me here with a very big argument. I would say it's a much more complicated than that. I think the reality is, my personal opinion is that I'm not sure if the Olympics or anyone out there knows exactly how to tackle that social media activity, simply because it's too fast. You can literally create any program overnight if you are a very clever pseudo sponsor, as long as you have a relationship with an athlete or someone who's already there, or with different means. There's a very quick way you can disrupt basically the ecosystem. So I think really certainly I wouldn't say play necessarily with it. I would say it's probably turn digital towards your advantage, rather than trying to restrict athletes who clearly have shown that they need to be empowered. It's the reality. If you're talking about 10 years ago, probably the audience of some of those big athletes was so minimum compared to what you could get in terms of live TV coverage. I would say probably not. But you look at today, an athlete like Bolt, or any Greg Rufford, for example. I mean, just those people are media owners in their own right. They have more followers sometimes on social media channels that some mini games or one single games can receive in terms of audience on TV, and it's a reality. So trying to restrict people who are so powerful from a media standpoint with rules which are somehow not equalized between big stars, and also think about the athletes who just recently qualified. There's still people who are fighting for their place in Rio at the moment. So those people could get qualified. For them, it's kind of an opportunity. They don't have any funding. They can't do anything. So I think the rule is too restrictive, and it's not really coping with the actual context, the real life context. That's my opinion. So it's just have to work a different model, really.
Yep. Do you agree with this, Daniel, that the Rule 40 is too restrictive, especially when you have athletes that are just showing up in the Olympics for the first time and that they do not have any funding at all? They are pure amateurs, if you can use the term. Do you agree with this vision?
I definitely agree that it seems too restrictive. I mean, touching on Alex's point, there are some people still qualifying. I mean, we recently dealt with a golfer who thinks that he's going to the Olympics. Obviously, this is the first Olympics for a very, very long time where golf has been accepted. And from what I recall, they're not actually going to know whether they're at the Olympics till the 1st of July. And that's when the rankings come in and decide the Olympic places. So, as we touched on, if you're an English person, let's say an English golfer, something like Danny Willett, who won the Masters only a few months ago, he should, in theory, have told all his sponsors by the 27th of January, I'm going to the Olympics. You know, we need to work out my package, my advertising, everything around that for when I'm there. But he doesn't know, and he won't know for another couple of weeks whether he's even going. So in this age of fast media and things changing, 7 months in which to plan all these things and get everything far in advance when people aren't even qualifying it does seem a little bit out of touch. I know obviously golf is an extreme example. It's not like you know, a shot putter who is also amateur. Golfers are, you know, very, very well remunerated, and they're on the world tour, and the people that will qualify for the Olympics will be the elite golfers. So it's not so much of a consideration for them on a financial standpoint, but for their endorsers, the people that have helped support them, if all of a sudden they're told, well, you've been having adverts with me for 10 years, but during the games period you can't because you missed the opportunity to get a Rule 40 waiver or a deemed consent, I think they're going to be pretty upset about that, and understandably so.
Yeah, I think basically what you are saying is that something like the Rule 40 has to imply some changes in terms of how the IOC has organized the way you qualify for this kind of competition, because there are marketing implications on that, and you just gave us an example. So it's something like, so Rule 40 is not only to forbid this kind of practices, but you have to think in a more broader way. How can this Rule 40 really imply a significant change in how you structure the whole competition in terms of the qualification of the athletes and so on? Because not all of them are top athletes with a lot of sponsors. You have some athletes, well, many athletes that do not have any sponsor at all, or they are finding very hard to just train 5, 6, or 7 times a week. So do you think that, following your thoughts, do you think that the Rule 40 can really imply a significant change in terms of how the International Olympic Committee approaches the qualification process for the Olympic Games themselves?
Yeah, I think it all starts at the top, but we've got to look a little bit closer to home. So Team GB, they're the people that decide who goes from Britain and the various other countries, their Olympic association. So if golf is perhaps not the best example, it's new and the rules will change for the next one. But if you are a weightlifter or a shot putter and Team GB's qualification doesn't happen until a few months before, I think that's where the blame's got to go. But they are having pressure placed on them from the IOC to enforce Rule 40 and to make sure that the commercial arrangement stays strong. So if the IOC went a little bit further and perhaps gave them a little bit more leeway, or perhaps in the future when the exemptions have a bit more time to bed in, they may change slightly. Because as you said, somebody like Mo Farah, he's had his corn adverts on the television for a few years now, so he probably, I mean, he was always going to succeed and get to the Olympics, but his sponsors probably would have applied anyway, even if they weren't sure he was going. Whereas an unknown athlete who is going to the Olympics for the first time, they wouldn't have even had the chance a lot of the time to get a sponsor in place to then consider the implications of Rule 40.
Yeah, for sure. What current legislation is in place for official sponsors and rights holders to protect their digital IP?
So obviously it varies from country to country, and I can only really talk about how the laws are in England. But there are a few things specifically around the Olympics. So there's a piece of legislation that came in 1995 called OSPA, the Olympic Symbols Protection Act, which gives specific protection to things like the Olympic rings, to the word Olympics, and it's almost like a higher form of trademark protection, which the Olympics and the IOC have through the registration of their trademarks. So if somebody infringes on that, they can then take them to court, or if they're aware of an infringement happening, they could, in theory, get an injunction to stop that from happening. In addition to that, for London 2012, there was even harsher legislation that not only protected the words, the Olympics, and the symbols themselves, but any association with the Olympics and London 2012. I mean, it got to the point where there was a lot of stuff in the newspapers about calves near the site that was called the Olympic rings that had been like that for a generation, but the legislation had come in, and that all of a sudden was an association with the games, even if it wasn't a direct one. Or another example would have been an athlete running in front of the Olympic competitions, the venues. That may not say they're associated with the games, but it is an association. So that came in, and that was very strict. That's actually now fallen away because obviously the London Olympics has ended. But one of the conditions the IOC gives when they award the games is that the host nation will have some strong legislation to protect their intellectual property. And my understanding is that Brazil has something in place similar to what was in London 2012. But as Alex will talk about, you know, the question is, it's all well and good having all this protected, but what can actually be done? If somebody goes on Twitter, they hashtag something, they get a lot of traction, they use an Olympic word or an Olympic association, there's only so much the courts can do because it takes time to get an injunction. It takes time to build a case. Once the Olympics is over and they've got traction from their hashtag, they don't really care anymore. You know, they've got it out there, they've got a lot of hits, they've got a lot of likes, it's gone. Yeah, they may be sued, but the damage has been done. I mean, one more thing, in England, we also have the laws of passing off, which essentially can't create an association between something like the Olympics with, let's say, paddy power. They can't just use the goodwill of the Olympics. They can face damages as a result. But again, if somebody does it on Twitter or even puts an advert on TV, it's happened. It's out there. It can't be taken away. So even whilst the law has ways to prevent this, whether it can cope with social media in particular is a very, very good question.
Yeah, so you think, so you guys, do you think that it is worthwhile to take the risk? Always teasing you, always teasing you.
Sorry, taking the risk as in what?
Yeah, as to really to take a chance on that and see how it happens if the content gets an hype for our brand, for instance, because as Daniel said, the injection laws and suits and so on, it takes so long to happen that maybe you can just give it a try and see what happens if it goes viral. Because if it goes viral, maybe you already get your ROI in these Olympics.
Yeah, I think you're definitely the digital specialist. I can understand that, Marcus. But coming back to the previous point that Daniel touched on, I think there's two elements. If you look at any sort of ambush which is specifically happening through digital channels, the challenge really from a legal perspective, and that's something that has been sort of raised when I did the research, especially from legal specialists, is that you can't really protect digital products, marks, the same way you can protect, for example, the Olympic rings, simply because a mark has to be unique and distinctive. How would you protect a hashtag, for example? Simply the words are usually shorter, they're usually different, they're there to literally maximize engagement, and they don't meet those requirements. So from a legal perspective, you can't. It's very challenging to anyway to be able to protect or install any legislation on those digital. You know, whether that's a tweet, a snap, I mean, you name it. You know, there's a number of channels out there with new products. So that's the first challenge, I would say, and it's a difficult one. You can say from a digital perspective as well, there are new technologies, like we talked about virtual reality, but we're talking about revolving board advertising, for example. And that always goes back to the contract itself, which can also strike. I mean, obviously the Olympics is a very mature property. They wouldn't obviously make that sort of mistake, but there's a lot of new touch point channels and new entry points which are possible through digital. Simply because the channels are less mature, they're more new, and that's where clever and creative marketers can strike. So from that perspective, it's very challenging anyway. So, and again, coming back to the athletes, I just wanted to emphasize is that no matter what, whether it's you're recently qualified or you are the big star, wherever you are the pseudo sponsor, you are the official sponsor, it usually works in favor of the big athlete because you are the person who has the most known. So if I'm a pseudo sponsor and I want to create a big buzz, I'm probably more likely to talk about someone who is very famous, who I know is going to create a lot of buzz, as opposed to someone who just literally qualified 2 weeks ago. Even though we know he could be a next champion, but that's the reality. It always works in favor. That emphasizes the imbalance. So coming back to your main question, I would say at this stage, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen. But considering what the level of ambush that happened in Rio and also the We Demand Change campaign, which initially started in Twitter, I think the IOC maybe have to start reviewing their business model. One very key, I would say, point as well, which was raised by the different digital specialists, the different brand specialists as well, which I interviewed during my dissertation, was that, well, actually, wherever you are an official sponsor, you should actually be in a much stronger position when you activate. And let's say there was a lot of ambush activity. If everything was in place to make sure that you could maximize the official sponsor program, you would actually sort of diminish the tone of voice of the pseudo sponsors, if that makes sense. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're Panasonic and you're the official sponsor, and you have, I don't know, 10 or 15 brands pseudo sponsoring that remit.
Sorry, has Panasonic paid you? Because you are ambushing this hangout if Panasonic has paid you.
Sorry, I take that back. Let's say a consumer electronics brand, a major consumer electronic brand who come with an official sponsor. Sorry to give away real life examples, but let's say you had 15 other pseudo sponsor consumer electronic brands who wanted to try to ambush. Well, normally in theory, the tone of voice of the official sponsor should be much stronger than having 20 pseudo sponsors who would try to ambush, logically. But the reality is only because of the rigid approval system from the IOC, the fact that because of our rigid system, official sponsors have to be late when they activate, they need to ask for approval, and as you know, digital is something which needs to be very quick. Let's say a prediction event takes place very quickly and you have to change your activation last minute. The pseudo sponsor will obviously be much more efficient than an official sponsor due to the approval system. So depending on the case scenarios on how you activate, if you take all this into account, you can see that actually the current climate and the ecosystem works in much more in favor for pseudo sponsors than in reality, essentially around digital, simply because of that approval system, which is kind of unbalanced. It doesn't work in favor for the official sponsors. That would be the main point I will probably bring in. So for me, yeah, the IOC probably will have to take that into consideration very seriously and maybe try to rethink their business model and probably, like you mentioned earlier, maybe think about, rather than working on exclusivity with very high sums of money, maybe try to change it slightly and make sure they partner with the digital channels to create maybe more value for the official sponsors.
Yeah,
that's just my thought.
Yeah, no, that's it. I was asking you, so as a last question, in terms of legislation, Daniel, do you think there are some real solutions that you are seeing now that can be applied in the future?
It's difficult. I mean, the very nature of the IOC and the Olympics is that it's global. So each country has their own individual legislation. There's only so much coordination that can happen. I mean, an example could be that perhaps the United States or perhaps the EU passes legislation that will force the likes of Twitter or Facebook to take down content. But then you go into a whole other realm of issues like data protection, whose content is that, freedom of speech. It's a bit of a minefield, really. Another option might be just to to have an expedited process to make things a little bit quicker during the Olympic Games. I mean, for example, CAS is always out there, have a special tribunal at the Olympics for issues like doping and breaches of the rules, that you don't have to wait for the 6 months to get your CAS trial. There are judges there waiting to give answers, but that's under the IOC's jurisdiction. So it can only really be applied on that quick basis to something that's in action, to something that's happening that has the jurisdictional basis. I think the law is always going to struggle to keep up with the digital changes that are happening, and the reality is that even if we had a perfect law out there that somehow managed to capture these things and protect rights holders like the IOC, and even in a broader context, somebody like FIFA or the Euros that are happening next week, it'll be pretty hard to then implement that law because it'll take time to get it through the courts. And as Alex has said, you know, tweets are instant. They're out there. You put the tweet up, you get it seen by 1 million people, it goes viral, and it comes down within 10 minutes. No court system in the world is going to be able to cope with that.
So for you, law will be always behind reality, right?
Unfortunately so, yeah. Until maybe reality slows down, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, for sure. No, I have to agree with Alex, because I think that the IOC and the other organizations like UEFA and FIFA and so on, they really have to review their business model in terms. And I think in terms of the marketing mix, I think the key component is distribution. That's the main stuff. It's distribution in the online world and in the offline world. And if in the offline world these companies already own the channel, so these organizations, they do already own the channel, and it's TV, the main channel, I think that they have to shift their mind to digital. And we have saw some changes now in the United States. For instance, the National Football League has sold some of his matches to Twitter, so people are going to watch the matches on Twitter. So that's kind of a big game changer, because if people are going to watch it on Twitter, and if I know who is watching, and I know what plays did they watch, and I know if they were in the United States or if they were in Europe, that means that in terms of a revenue model, I can monetize that live streaming content in terms of publicity that is really targeted to that consumer in particular in Europe. So that kind of personalized approach, it's a massification, but at the same time you are personalizing the way you approach this consumer. I think that will be the future, because otherwise you are going to be dead if you really try to invest all in TV. And we have saw that in the final of the UEFA Champions League this year. BT Sport, right? They already live streamed the match on YouTube. Only in the UK, yeah, all right, that's for sure. But 3 million people watch the match, right? So that's a lot of people. So maybe you have to think about how we are going to distribute our content, our premium content in the future. And maybe television is going to be that, because all the studies, they are saying now that mobile phones, people are going to mobile, and you have the micro moments from Google. People are going to mobile phones to consume everything, just not only to do searches about products or services that they want to acquire, or products or services that they are interested in, but they are also going there to consume content. And you do not have a portable TV. No, you have a portable mobile phone, and YouTube is everywhere. So if people have the possibility to consume that content everywhere at any time, where in every device, I think that the audiences will go bigger again. But the key is you really have to own the channel, and you really have to define a new business model in terms of how you can monetize how people watch this kind of content in these platforms. Maybe you can transfer some of the learnings that you have with TV in terms of how you monetize, in terms of publicity model. Maybe you can transfer some of these ideas to the online world, but that has to happen, because this will not slow down, as we know. So guys, I think that we are in the end of this hangout. Maybe I would like to ask you if you have some final thoughts about this team. Alex, you want to go first?
I think you absolutely sort of summarized. Your last point was very, very relevant. You can see it coming back to the broadcasters themselves. I mean, they're obviously testing how they can obviously monetize better through digital. The example of the UEFA or the Europa League final is exactly spot on. I think clearly now it's not dictated by consumer trends, because obviously younger generation, people in general, want to consume more content through their mobile. They want to, they want to be sort of more free in terms of how they're consuming, where they're consuming, how and what they consume. Absolutely. It's completely relevant. Now, coming back, I think, to the main topic today, I think you can see the big balance where we started in terms of talking about how a governing body can try to control athletes during a major global manifestation when you have 10,500 plus participating athletes from all around the world, the huge social media activity that's going to take place. One thing I forgot to mention is that obviously you have, those tools, social media listening tools that some organizing or brands can use to monitor. But the reality is you can have hundreds of people doing this during the Olympics, but still, the level of, I think my personal opinion is the level of activity will be so strong, even if you are able to spot something. The process, like Daniel mentioned earlier, for the brand to come back to the sport and to the sport to take action, to nail that down, that brand, within that 3 weeks window, it's just going to be impossible. It's just too challenging. Number of athletes, number of channels. So I think personally is the only way around really is that for the IOC to rethink, to work more in partnership with social, with digital, and really empower the athletes. And without the athletes, I think you can probably agree that the Olympics wouldn't be what they are. I mean, the example of London 2012, I mean, without giving any names, but some of the pictures of ambushes what I showcased, we don't really know what happened to them. It certainly didn't get disqualified. And it keeps on going on. So I'll be very curious to see how that Rule 40 will be relevant and will be answer the requirements in the next Rio Olympics. It'll be very interesting, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. Daniel, do you have some final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as you both said, I mean, very articulately put that it seems like the only real solution is to have a bit of a business change by the IOC. But an organisation like that, which has been around for, I think, over 100 years now, is always going to be resistant to change. It took a long time for them to even come up with the relaxation for Rule 40, and it'll be interesting to see if, as Alex said, any breaches are enforced. I mean, looking at it from a sponsor's point of view with an athlete, quite a lot of the agreements that we see with them detail specifically Rule 40 in the agreement and says, well, you're sponsoring me, I'm the athlete, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to do anything in the games period unless you have a waiver, which, as we know, is difficult to get, and there are very many options not. But if that sponsor then uses the athlete's image, whether they've given them consent or not, it's the athlete that's going to get in trouble. And it will be really, really interesting to see if any of the athletes are in any serious trouble as a result. You can't really imagine the IOC wanting to kick out of the Olympics to start. But if there's a Romanian rower who has breached the rules, I can't see them getting the same level of protection that some of the superstars would get. So, I mean, from a legal perspective, as we said, there's only so much that can be done, and it'll be interesting to see whether the IOC pushes governments to try and enforce their rights in a firmer way, or whether they do, as you suggested, perhaps just adapt their business model going forwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's something that people say that if you can't win them, you have to join them. I really believe on that, because that's how things are going to work. That's how we behave as consumers, and we are millennium guys. So imagine the new generation. So the guys that have now 5 years old, 10 years old, They do not watch TV. They do not care about if they are using an hashtag about a brand or an athlete during the games period or something like that. So it will be a totally different generation from us with totally different behaviors. So I think that we are going to get really exciting times ahead, and let's see what happens. So guys, thank you all for being here. Alex, thank you for inviting us, me, Daniel, and Clifford that couldn't join us here today because technical difficulties. So thank you, Alex, for inviting me to be here. And don't know if you have now really some final words.
No, what can I say? I can say thank you very much, and let's see. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the next future events. Euros, I can't wait, and more importantly, the Olympics. I'll be watching that opening ceremony with a lot of interest. I can tell you that. I'll try to connect on social at the same time, see what happens. But bring the games on. That's all I can say.
Yeah, for sure. Daniel, do you have also some really final words?
Yeah, just the same. Thank you for having me, and also I'm excited to see what happens. It'll be as you both touched on, perhaps the most innovative adverts are always the ambushes. So there should be some interesting things going on in the next few months, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. To everyone who was watching, thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, you have our contacts on the description of this video. So be free, please be free to share with us your thoughts and to throw us your questions. So thanks everyone for watching, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye.